Hello and welcome to our presentation about the ATAR and applying to university through UAC. Firstly, you might be wondering who UAC is. UAC is an organisation that looks after university entry for more than 30 different institutions. We also administer applications for our access schemes, which we'll discuss later in the video. UAC is most well known because we calculate and provide the ATAR to all Higher School Certificate or HSC students in New South Wales. But before discussing the ATAR calculation, I want to describe the difference between your HSC marks and the ATAR. Because once you understand that there is a difference, you'll understand the ATAR more easily. So, at the end of Year 12, NESA, or the New South Wales Education Standards Authority, reports to HSC students the subjects or courses they have completed, the HSC mark they have achieved for each course, and the performance band that mark aligns to. Meanwhile, the ATAR, which is provided by UAC, is one number that tells you where you are positioned amongst all students in New South Wales. So, HSC marks are about your performance, whereas the ATAR is all about your position. When we talk about the ATAR, we will always talk about it like being in a running race, because that's really easy to understand. All Year 12 students are in this running race. You may get to the end of that race and think, well, I've done my best personal performance, fantastic. But when you're standing at the finish line, you might look around and think, well, hey, I've just done my personal best. However, I'm positioned in the middle of the pack. So your performance in the race may look very different to your final position. Like in your HSC, your marks can look different to your ATAR. So the only thing that a student can control in the whole scenario of the HSC and the ATAR is how well you're going to perform. You cannot control your ATAR or your position because you can't control the competition or the performance of all other HSC students. So let's talk about the ATAR. What is the ATAR? The ATAR, or the Australian Tertiary Admissions Rank, is just that. It is a rank. It's not a mark or a score. It's just a number which tells us where you are positioned for the sole purpose of universities to rank and select students. It's a number between 0 and 99.95, and it will not define you as a student for the rest of your academic career. So, let's talk about the calculation. To calculate an ATAR, UAC needs 10 units of ATAR courses, which includes 2 units of English and another 8 remaining units of study, which can only include 2 units of Category B courses. Studying more than 10 units allows UAC to exclude your course with the lowest scaled marks from the ATAR calculation, leaving you with the best possible ATAR result. When calculating ATARs, we use the best scaled marks, not the best HSC marks. So it could be a mixture of any of your courses, but it must include 2 units of English. You heard me say scaling. This is a topic that many students talk about. But let's talk about scaling in terms of the ATAR calculation. The ATAR is calculated by using 10 units of scaled marks. Scaling is the first step in the calculation of the ATAR. So you may be thinking, why does UAC scale? UAC scales marks so that we can create a more even playing field. So no student is either advantaged or disadvantaged because of their course choice. There is much talk out there about UAC scaling courses, but UAC is not actually scaling courses. We're scaling the academic ability of students within a course. This is why you find that courses have different scaled means, because the course's scaled mean tells us something. It tells us about the student's academic ability within the course or the strength of the competition. At UAC, we call this the course candidature. So a course with a high scaled mean tells us that the academic ability of students within that course is relatively high, while courses with a lower scaled mean tells us that the academic ability of students within that course varies from high to low. It does not tell you that you cannot get a high ATAR including a course with a lower scaled mean, because of course you can. You just need to be a little bit further to the top of that course to get more benefit from scaling. So let's look at some data from the 2023 HSC. If we look at the table in front of you, out of the 116 HSC courses, we have listed just a few. Here you'll see Aboriginal Studies, Business Studies, Drama, English Advanced, Investigating Science, Mathematics Advanced, Physics, Visual Arts, French Beginners, and Hospitality. The next column shows the median performance band for each course. The performance band are determined by NESA and have no bearing on the calculation of the ATAR whatsoever. The performance band, however, do tell us where the middle of the cohort sits within each course. For many courses, it is a band 4, which is marks between 70 and 79. The next column shows us the median mark for each course, and the median marks, in general, sit around 75. Now, many people will look at that and think, well, why isn't it 50? However, only performance band 1 students are receiving marks below a 50. So, if the majority of marks sit between 50 and 100, then the middle or median mark generally sits around 75. And in some instances, the median mark can be higher. The next column shows the HSC mean or average performance of students within the course. And as you can see, it is similar to the median mark. The next column, the scaled mean of the course, is the column that most people look at and make judgments around whether UAC is scaling courses up or down. But remember, we're not scaling courses. We're scaling the academic ability of students within the course. The scaled mean tells us about the average position of students within that course, which is very different to the HSC mean, which is about the average performance of students within the course. Like in the running race, those numbers may look different. The next column, however, shows us the maximum ATAR achieved by a student where both units of a course were included in their calculation. For instance, if we look at Investigating Science, we can see it's got a lower scaled mean than the other courses shown. But someone still received an ATAR of 99.45 and had Investigating Science included in their calculation, which is a fantastic result. Some people might then ask, does that mean I can receive a higher ATAR if I don't study Investigating Science? And yes, you might. If you look at the last column, which shows the maximum ATAR achieved, where a course wasn't included in the calculation, but it was a part of a student's pattern of study, if we look at Investigating Science, where that course was included in a student's pattern of study, but was excluded from their ATAR calculation, their ATAR increased to 99.80, which again is a fantastic result. But if we compare it to the result they received when Investigating Science was included in their ATAR calculation, we're really looking at a marginal increase. And if you're looking at the table with all these different HSC courses in front of you, as you'll see in most cases, the ATAR calculation does not change for most of these courses. And in the instance that an ATAR does increase when a course is excluded from the calculation, keep in mind that that student must have been studying more than the needed 10 units for the ATAR calculation. So if you are worried that the subjects you've chosen might decrease your ATAR for whatever reason, just remember that at UAC, we're always trying to maximize your final ATAR result. So now you've seen some data from last year's HSC and seen the difference between scaled means and ATARs, and that doing a course with a low scaled mean does not mean that you can't get a higher ATAR. So now let me tell you the story about Fred and Laura, who have completed the exact same HSC courses. We can see that Fred gets marks of 70 for all of his courses and Laura receives 80s in all of hers. You can see that Fred and Laura are only 10 marks apart. But when we look at their ATARs, there's a difference of almost 20 points. Now, many people, or a Fred in particular, would come to us at UAC on ATAR day and say, hey, I'm sorry, but I think something is wrong because my ATAR of 59.90 is not an average of 70. So how does that work? Fred, of course, is comparing his HSC marks with his ATAR or his performance with his position, which you really can't do because these are numbers that mean totally separate things. We're not using Fred's HSC marks to calculate his ATAR, but his scaled marks, which look very different. The actual story behind these students' ATARs is not in the HSC marks, but in the percentile column, which tells us where each student is positioned in their courses. So if we look at biology, for instance, a mark of 70 placed Fred in the 39th percentile. But what does that actually mean? Well, it means that 61% of students have received marks better than his. If we look at Laura, on the other hand, a mark of 80 in biology placed her in the 71st percentile. So she is in a much better position with only 29% of students ahead of her. If we look at English Advance, Fred's marks of 70 last year are placed in the 6th percentile. So 94% of students in English Advanced last year got marks better than him. If we look at Laura, however, a mark of 80 in English Advanced placed her in the 38th percentile, with 62% of students ahead of her. Remember, the ATAR is about your overall position. To achieve a more positive ATAR, students need to have marks on or above the middle mark so that they are positioned in the top half of the course. So if we were to align Fred's HSC marks against the median HSC marks, we can see that all of his marks lay beneath the middle. So it stands to reason that his ATAR would lay beneath the middle, which last year was 71.05. So this story's moral is that if you wanted to have a more positive ATAR, you should be getting marks on or above the middle. So that's the ATAR. Let's talk about applying to university through UAC. UAC will always publish their key dates on the UAC website. Let's talk about what these important dates are and what they mean for students applying to study at a university in 2025. The UAC undergraduate application is online and opens in early April. If you are a student interested in applying for early entry to a university, UAC also provides an early entry application, which we call the Schools Recommendation Scheme, or SRS. The SRS application closes mid-September, meaning you cannot apply for early entry through SRS after the closing date, but we'll discuss this in more detail in a moment. Students who are not applying to the Schools Recommendation Scheme but want to have their university application submitted on time must complete and pay for your application by the end of September. We refer to this period as the early bird close. Please don't confuse it with early entry. Now, students can apply after this date. However, if they do, it will have a higher processing charge. Once you have selected your university preferences and submitted the application, you can still edit your preference choices throughout the admissions cycle. However, there are specific periods in which you will temporarily be blocked from making changes to your university preferences while UAC assesses applications before the offer release dates. The blocked out periods are between the close of preference date and the offer release date. After a close of preference has occurred, you will need to wait to see if you've successfully received an offer before you can make further changes to your preferences within your application. The first close of preference date relevant to Year 12 students happens in early November, and this is for students who have applied for early entry through an SRS application. So this means that from the time when you submit your UAC and SRS application until early November, you can change your preferences within your application as many times as you like. This will not have any negative outcome on your application, as UAC only begins assessing Year 12 applications for early entry through SRS from early November. So you have lots of time to change your mind about your degree or course choices. You'll find out if you've been made an early entry offer from a successful SRS application around the second week in November. The next important date is the ATAR release, and for Year 12 students in New South Wales, this happens in mid-December. So once you know your ATAR result, you have around 24 hours to edit, reorder, or change your university preferences within your UAC application. Now that your ATAR result is known, UAC assesses your ATAR for university entry for offers released in December and all other offers made in 2025. If you are successful in receiving an ATAR-based offer in December, you'll be notified by UAC in late December. Students can check all the key application dates on the UAC website. So, how do you prepare for this application? Of course, we hope that all students have researched their options, but if not, there's still time. And when we talk about research, we're talking about you looking at the different studies available to you through attending things such as open days, career expos, and even exploring websites. When doing your research, you should also investigate all course possibilities. So, for instance, I want to be an engineer. However, what if I don't get into engineering? What am I going to do next? What would be the next course you should investigate to help you get to where you want to be? You also need to be checking to see if there are any additional selection criteria. The further selection criteria could be a personal statement, a special test, or an interview. The UAC application opens for students to submit their university applications in early April. That includes applications for EAS or the Educational Access Scheme, SRS, the School's Recommendation Scheme, or ES, Equity Scholarships. When the UAC application opens for submissions, students will have received their UAC PIN. UAC issues you with your UAC PIN via email on the day applications open. We will use your email address that you have registered with NESA, so make sure you have your personal email listed as this is the best option. To lodge your UAC application, you will need this UAC PIN and your NESA student number. If you don't receive our email with your UAC PIN or cannot locate that email, please get in touch with our customer service team for assistance. You will also need your unique student identifier number, a USI, to submit your UAC application. If you do not have a USI, please check the USI website on how to create one. Another number that is helpful to have before becoming a university student is a tax file number, or TFN. If you do not have a TFN already, consider obtaining one while you are a Year 12 student, as you will be asked for your TFN during the university enrolment process. The Educational Access Scheme, or EAS, is for students who have been negatively impacted because of circumstances beyond their control that has affected their grades while at school. This application is part of your uni application. You will find the link to EAS once you've submitted your preferences. There are 9 different categories, and I recommend that all students check each category type to determine whether they are eligible to be considered under this scheme. The scheme is for special consideration, and students must provide supporting documentation to back their claims. This may include a personal statement or an educational impact statement from your school, and it may also include legal or medical documentation. With EAS, it is not a guarantee of entry, but it may help students get over the line into a course they wish to study. The next access scheme I'd like to discuss is the School's Recommendation Scheme, or SRS. SRS is an early entry scheme for students in Year 12. This is where students are considered for entry based on their Year 11 results and their school's recommendation. Like EAS, the link to apply for SRS will appear after you've submitted your university preferences. If you miss this link, log back into your submitted UAC application and locate the Apply for SRS link at the bottom of your application's home screen. Students completing the New South Wales HSC will not need to provide any documentation of their Year 11 results. However, for students studying outside of New South Wales or studying the International Baccalaureate, IB, you must supply your Year 11 results or academic grades for assessment by uploading your documents as PDFs within your UAC application. Offers for SRS will be released in November. There are 2 types of offers. One is unconditional, meaning that the universities had a look at your Year 11 results and school recommendations, and like the look of you and have said, here's an offer, we're happy to have you. The other form of an offer is a conditional offer, and this is where the university has said, we would like to make you an offer, however, we have conditions. And in many cases, this means a minimum ATAR. The conditional offer is not a complete offer. It's just a letter of intent. And you must fulfill any additional criteria for that to be made an unconditional offer later in the admissions cycle. The last access scheme I'd like to tell you about is equity scholarships. This is for students who need some financial assistance while at university. It is an online application and the criteria is mostly based on Centrelink financial assistance. There are other circumstances that students may apply under, but documentation must be provided. This application is open to all future and current university students. Next, let's talk about the selection ranks and adjustment factors. For many students, their selection rank is their ATAR, but for other students, their selection rank would be their ATAR plus adjustment factors. But what are adjustment factors? There are 5 types. The first one, subject adjustments, means that you have performed at a band 5 or 6 level in a Year 12 course that relates to the university degree that you want to get into. So for instance, I want to get into engineering and I received a band 5 or 6 in Maths Advanced. Those adjustments will sit on top of my ATAR to change my selection rank for that course. The next one is location adjustments. This means that I live within the university's catchment and they will give me a couple of adjustment points that once again will sit on top of my ATAR to change my selection rank. The following concerns equity. So your Educational Access Scheme application may award you a few adjustments that again sit on top of your ATAR and change your selection rank. There's also elite athlete and performer adjustments, and this is an application that you must submit directly to the university for consideration of your competing at a state or national level in a sport or some form of performance. And the last one is about additional selection criteria. And not all courses have additional selection criteria, but if there is, then that criteria will again sit on top of your ATAR, which changes your selection rank for course entry. So now you know that there are lots of different adjustments. Let's talk about what a preference is. A university preference is a course that you want to get into. Each course code indicates the university that you want to study at, the course you want to take, and the campus with which the course is being conducted. You can list up to 5 preferences on your UAC application, which can be changed as many times as you like throughout the whole application period. Students are recommended to list your preferences in the order of how you want them to be considered. So, beginning with your dream course as your first preference. And now you know what a preference is. So, let's talk about change of preferences. Once a student has received their ATAR, there are lots of factors which should be considered. One is adjustment factors, but the other is that they should look at the lowest selection rank for each course they want to be considered for, as the lowest selection rank indicates the entry level for those courses. Students should be very realistic about their preferences on their application and order their courses in the order of their preference, remembering to have your dream course as number 1. Students should also monitor the change of course preference and closing dates. Once an offer has been made, UAC would highly recommend accepting it as there is no guarantee of another offer in later offer rounds. Once you've accepted your offer, if you've changed your mind, all you need to do is remove the offered course from your preference list. Rearrange your preferences by the next close of preference date to be considered for another offer in the following offer round. Once again, monitor those close of preference dates on the UAC website. Once you've accepted your offer, however, you should take instruction from the university about enrolling or deferring your course. Finally, here are a few top tips. I recommend that students don't lose sight of their goals. Make sure that you leave all your options open and explore all course possibilities. So think about, what's your plan B? Make sure your preferences are in order of your preference and track all those closing dates. Remember that the ATAR is only one pathway into university. If your ATAR result doesn't get you entry into your dream course straight out of high school, don't panic. There are so many other pathways into university, and I would really encourage you to research those. Thank you for watching. I hope you got some great information from this presentation and that you feel more confident about the decisions you'll be making throughout your Year 12 year.